Kidding me?
I want my down right now.
You're welcome.
It's not
I
over.
brought it.
Lasty guilted them into making cookies.
Good.
I love those things so much.
I would eat it
I
as
eat
a
the
boat
dough. They're so good. I love cookie dough.
You eat it raw?
Oh.
Oh, why not?
All right, well, welcome back, everybody. Go ahead and grab a seat. We're going to start this next round. Normally, I'd say we're saving the best for last. I'm just going to say we're saving the last for last today. So hopefully there'll be no snoring. I know it's the last talk of the day. But I just want to thank everybody for hanging in there with us. I really do appreciate that. And what we're going to do is, in a couple minutes, we're going to start up and just have a conversation. It's actually going to be an extension of what we already talked about in a lot of different ways. Just talking about memorialization in an age of cremation and green or natural burial, and kind of what impact that movement has had on not only physical but also ceremonial memorialization. All right, so most of you have probably seen me standing up here, and most of you probably have a heck of an idea of who I am. So my day job is president of Dodge Memorials out of Xenia, Ohio. We're celebrating our 160th year in business. So we've been around since 1864. I also switch hats, and I wear the hat of board president of Woodland Cemetery in Xenia.
How long have you been that?
Longer than I care, to be honest. I went onto that board with the promise that I would only be a consultant.
That's what they
And
told
yeah, and like 15 years later, I'm now president for life, I think. So that kind of happens that way. And then obviously I'm the founder and the coordinator of Before I Die Ohio. So that's kind of my background. I am a third generation memorialist and graduated from Miami University, a little bit west of us. My wife and I are a merger, what they call it in Miami, so they can try to take your money and give you some chintzy things at Valentine's Day. So, and then I also, it's been a while since COVID, but I also do teach a 2-hour seminar at Cincinnati College of Mortuary Science. For those funeral directors that are getting continuing education here, I do that too. So that's a little bit about me. So the overview, we're basically going to be looking at industry trends, identifying unique challenges of our industry that are presented with cremation and with green natural burial. And then ultimately we're going to discuss some strategies and show options that are actually available that most people don't fully realize. So understand that this is going to be a benefit for you, the general public, but it was also designed to be something that was beneficial for funeral directors that are coming for continuing education, which we have. Everybody say hi to our one funeral director getting continuing education. Yes, lady. So,
What am I, chopped liver?
are you getting continuing education, TR?
Of course I am.
Okay, number 2 in the back. All right, here we go. All right. So this is what cremation looks like in our country. If you look at this, is the national average. This is Ohio, but right now we are in about the 62, 63% range, depending on where you are in Ohio, which lags a little behind the rest of the country. But the thing that surprises most people is we have the 5th most crematories or retorts in the country. And what that means is when you have that many retorts, which is what the machine's called, in one state, the way you make money with having one of those machines is to use it. So there's a lot of push in a lot of ways for cremation, because I'm not going to build a retort. Demand's a big part of it. But then once it happens, so Ohio is not the 5th largest state in the country, but it has that many crematories within the state. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad. I'm just saying that reality influences the market in Ohio. Okay. Full disclosure, I intend to be cremated. I do. Go ahead.
I don't know what a retort is.
A retort is the machine that cremates the body.
Okay.
Thank
you. That's what I thought it was,
Yep.
but I didn't know for sure.
So I'm not, during this talk, I'm not going to give you a positive or negative about cremation. I'm just going to talk to you about the realities of how it impacts the way we view the world and the way it impacts the industry that I'm in. So when you talk about final disposition, and I am a little different from most people here. A lot of people will talk ashes, and a lot of people will talk cremains. I am adamant about calling it a cremated body. The reason being is that once you take a human body from a full-size body and you cremate it, psychologically things change in this country. And if I start calling it ashes, that's not a human being anymore. If I start calling it cremains, it's some kind of answer. It is a cremated body. It's a tighter version of your body, okay? But it's still a human body. So you will hear me bring that up over and over. The people at Dodge are sick and tired of when they say ashes, I say cremated body. Yeah, cremated body. So some of the things that you can do with a cremated body, and these are pretty typical. Placement in a private or public columbarium. Again, a columbarium is a building that holds specifically cremated bodies. Like a mausoleum will hold casketed bodies in a crypt. I think we heard about that earlier. You can have it interred into the ground. A lot of people still do that. Obviously, scattering is something that is becoming more and more popular. A lot of people do still keep the cremated body at home. My father is still hanging out in his bedroom at this moment. He will go to a cemetery, but in the interim period, he's hanging out there. And then a new thing is the idea of subdividing the body among family members. You can actually buy smaller urns. You can buy jewelry. You can buy different objects that you can place a cremated body or portions of a cremated body into that, and everybody can have a little piece. So that is something that was not always there. I mean, when Tommy was doing cremation years ago, I doubt anybody was ever talking a whole lot about subdividing, but it's just kind of become a thing here in the last 10 to 15 years. Green burial, and green is going to be one of those terms you heard Angie talk about, shades of green. This is in the eye of the beholder. What I typically mean by green burial is a way of naturally placing a body into the ground without any type of preservative. As you can see, we're starting to grow. Hybrid cemeteries mean they accept both green and regular burials, like a Calvary, Dayton, or natural only cemeteries. These are starting to happen throughout the United States. So this is become more and more of a movement. 60% of people interviewed said they were at least interested in exploring green burial. But what we are going to do is get into what green burial means. Go ahead.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
For the hybrid cemeteries, what does that look like?
So a hybrid cemetery means that there's going to be traditional casketed bodies in vaults in
Okay.
portions of the cemetery.
Okay.
What it also means is there could also be places where a shrouded or a wicker casketed body could be placed into the ground to naturally decompose.
Okay.
So, and they have both in the same cemetery. One section has one, or an area of it has one, and that's kind of the way that it works out.
Okay.
There's also places where, and again, you're talking green, some people consider a hybrid cemetery where you can scatter a cremated body. I know that Woodland's moving that direction, like Angie talked about. So there's different things that fall under the green umbrella that we'll get into.
Will someone who's doing a green burial get a memorial stone? Or
We're gonna touch on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I will touch on that in a little bit for sure.
So I think, yeah, the newer part of the Yellow Springs Cemetery, Glen Forest.
Yep. Glen Forest on the east side of the cemetery, it's traditional in the front and it's more natural burial in the back.
Can I bring up Calvary Cemetery real quick? I just did one yesterday.
Yes?
Have you been to Calvary Cemetery?
No.
Okay, well, it's ginormous, just like Woodland. But if you drive in, all you see is like a bunch of headstones. They have flat markers, everything mausoleums, and I hope you talk about Roger Glass at least once. But
Oh, yeah, I know.
yeah, and if you go all the way in the back, it's just beautiful preserve. It's called the St. Criteria Preserve, and that's where they do everything back there. Yeah.
And we'll actually see a couple of pictures of that, but it's basically prairie land. And most of the time, there's a reason why they do it that way, and I'll explain that in a little bit, is why they
Thank
go
you, Neil.
prairie like that. So, consumer trends. 21% of consumers would prefer a casketed burial. So there's literally about 21, so less than 1 in 4 still think of a casketed burial as your point of option, at least of those surveyed, right? Of the 40, almost 42% of consumers who would prefer cremation, and again, this is the pre-death determination. The numbers are higher for cremation, but of those, a little over a quarter of them still would like the cremated body placed in the ground. There are still some people that are looking into green burial and some people that are undecided. Green burial is not incredibly popular, but it is growing quickly. Cremation is now normal. Greater than 50% of deceased bodies are cremated. So that is now the norm in our country. So it used to be you talk about, oh, that's what the hippies and the the tree hunters and this, that, and the other do. And it's just not the case. It's somewhat environmentally conscious, but there's a lot of decisions besides just being green or environmentally friendly that people are choosing cremation. I saw a hand somewhere. Yes.
On the cremation, maybe I missed it, or you're gonna talk about it, that what percentage also have a service, therefore you're embalmed?
The traditional cremation.
Okay, so traditional cremation may or may not involve embalming, depending on how long the body's prepared. But that percentage, do you know off the top of your head? I don't know if it's, I'd say maybe
It's around 40 to
So maybe
50%.
half.
40 to 50%. In TR, are they typically embalmed?
Yes.
Or will,
Yes, most of them are.
okay, so typically, so 40 to 50% at least in this area.
Yes.
I will tell you, typically in this country, right, the further you go to the coasts, the more open to ideas happen, the higher the cremation rates are, natural burial ideas, keeping bodies at home, that kind of thing. In the Midwest, we tend to lag. For a lot of us, thankfully, we tend to lag. But so what does this provide as far as unique challenges for the death care industry? Well, I was just talking about, right? What are some of the considerations as why people choose to either cremate or bury green? Cost considerations is definitely one. If you look at the first major ramp up of cremation as a trend, it happened right around the time of the Great Recession. It had already started incrementally climbing, but when the Great Recession hit and a lot of people were having monetary stress, the idea of cremation, especially what's called direct cremation, which is literally, I'm going to take your loved one, I'm going to cremate them, I'm going to give them back to you in a box, there's not going to be any service or anything. That became very popular during that time. And once that genie was out of the bottle, as far as the exponential growth, it kept on going. And so that was one of the first big ramp ups. Part of the other reason, obviously, environmental concerns are part of it, although cremation is not as green as you think it is. Transient populations. This is one where a lot of people are choosing cremation because everybody's scattered. And instead of having a body embalmed, what they tend to do is cremate so that they can delay having services supposedly till everybody gets together. So the transient society kind of idea is another one. Another one is if, like my grandmother, if you die away from home, your options of getting the body back are a lot more complicated with a full body. And so a lot of times when that happens, because we all travel a lot or people live in Florida that are originally from Ohio or things like that, cremation becomes a more convenient option as far as them being able to transport after death. There's fewer religious prohibitions. I don't know if you know this, but there were several religions that forbade cremation as an option. And there have been modifications of that over time. But fewer and fewer religious objections now exist. There are stipulations. Like, for instance, if you're a Catholic, the Vatican has come down and said, you may cremate, but you may not scatter, and you need to be put in consecrated ground. So there are still some strings attached at times, but it is a lot more acceptable than it used to be. We are moving towards less ritualized versions of ceremony. And you can say, you know, chicken or egg, right? Did cremation create that, or because we're moving away from that, did that foster cremation? And I'd say it's a little of both. And then finally, it has now become socially acceptable, right? Because it's now normal. Cremation used to be the thing that one of those odd relatives over in California did. And that's the way it was viewed in a lot of ways. I remember when I first got into this industry, people would come to me and say, can you do a memorial for a cremated body? And I'd say, well, yeah. Why? Well, the guy that was up in Toledo said he doesn't have any of that. We were very ill prepared as an industry, both funeral homes and cemeteries and monument dealers, to deal or be prepared for what cremation is going to do within our industry. Because we assumed that if you cremated your loved one, all you wanted was a warm box and you didn't care. And that was shame on us. And we had to adjust and have done a much better job adjusting that. But you had, for decades, funeral directors that just said, oh, cremation's passing fad. It'll go away. You had the idea that if you cremated, you were some kind of not quite normal. And the reality is none of that's true. And so finally, most funeral homes and most people in the industry have gotten on board to understand that this is something people want to do by choice. And if we aren't there to provide for those families, they're going to turn to other options. And so that was a tough thing. And I think, TR, you would reinforce that. It took a while for our industry to come around to that.
Yeah, we're very, very slow to change in this industry, and it's our fault. We should be spanked for that. So
We have a lot of those back in my day
yeah,
type of people in our industry. We're not the most progressive industry, you know.
most of the one I hear that really irks me is my people don't like that. The consumer tells us what they want. We don't tell them what they want. So.
And then there would be the other people who just buried their head in the sand and just hope it go away. And that's just, the reality is this is the choice people are willing to make for a lot of reasons. And we've got to be okay with it. Like I said at the beginning, I'm going to be cremated. That's what my preference is, at least at this moment. My wife's one of those. My wife's all over the place. She started with cremation, we went to New Mexico. She said, ooh, that natural burial, that's pretty cool. So sometimes it evolves too. You go to where my wife is from in Southeast Ohio, funeral, casket, viewing, open casket. I mean, you don't have the option. I mean, and even there it's starting to evolve. So the more rural you go into society, the more traditional it tends to be. The farther south you go, the more traditional it tends to be. The farther east and west you go, the more progressive it becomes, as far as there's going to be a point, and it's already there, where on the West Coast, they're over 70% cremation. Okay, so how do we embrace this reality? Because fighting against it isn't going to do anybody any good. Okay.
Neil, do they do at-home services anymore? Like, they used to have the parlor and you came to the parlor in the olden days.
There is a movement to have the body at home in certain areas. I will tell you that there's different variations of that. And I will tell you that those who are trying to do it without the help of a funeral director is a very difficult thing to go about. but there is a small movement towards that kind of thing. But, and we'll get into this a little bit later, but I really feel like I wouldn't try to do complex plumbing at home myself. And I will tell you this, the death doula movement is helping with different aspects of that, and we'll hear about death doulas tomorrow. But my recommendation still is, even if you have an at-home viewing or visitation, there's certain things that I would not take on myself as a family, because we as a society are not prepared. In the 1700s, I mean, funeral directors barely existed. Well, I mean, you had undertakers that dug graves, but it was done at home. As the world evolved, and as things like, for instance, one of the sea changes in our country was the Civil War. Getting a Civil War soldier back to his family was one of the reasons why modern embalming came about. And so that industry really evolved over through the 1800s and into the 1900s to a very important and vital service. So here are some of my takes on what we're missing. First of all, American society, more than any other world, we suck at death. We're terrible. And at the Midwest, we're like on top of the mountain of how bad we are. You know, we've talked about we sweep it under the rug, stiff upper lip. You know, we don't show emotion around here. We're terrible at death. And what cremation does when you don't want to deal with death is it's a quick solution, especially direct cremation. I mean, you go direct cremation, it's like come back, pick them up, and such a time. That is ultimate. My sister always jokes that she's a river in Egypt, queen of denial, right? It helps you. There's a lot of ways where cremation can, not always, but can help you basically shove death away. And what you do is now it does allow the family to postpone the reality of death, and it becomes this denial. Am I saying that everybody that's cremated comes with this issue? No. But I'm saying a lot of families who cannot deal with death are using this as kind of the easy way out. Now they'll use excuses like we're waiting for everybody to, because we live in this transit society, right? Show of hands, how many people have people that they would invite to a funeral that live at least 2-3 states away, right? I mean, that's most of us this day and age. And then the other part is, let's not make a big deal out of it. We're not ready for it, or we'll just wait for a later time. Like my dad's celebration of life service that never happened, right? We'll eventually get there. And so what ends up happening is nothing. Natural burial addresses the finality issue. You know, you can't naturally bury and postpone, but you can have very little service with a natural burial. And so it may not fully address that part, but it's definitely more of a finality issue. It's closer to a traditional graveside service and what have you than cremation is, for sure. Here's another big one. The days of pensions and life insurance policies that could be utilized to take care of costs related to death. Half of Americans don't have life insurance at all. Only 33% of Americans have pensions, and a third retirement. So if you're that person, age and you die, what used to be utilized, your pension or your life insurance that rolled into your estate and then was able to pay for death, it isn't there anymore. So what happens is the people that remain are paying for this out of their own pocket. Because it's not like an instant access to estate money when somebody dies. If you're a spouse with a joint account, okay, you may have access to some stuff. But in a lot of cases, you're dealing with that. That's why pre-planning is so important. Because now you put that where it needs to be, it is spoken for money, and it takes care of those things. But I mean, Dayton, Ohio, GM, I mean, we had people with pensions all over the place, right? You worked at GM, you got a good pension, and eventually that money led down to the path of when you died, you had something. And also people mentally actually wanted to use that money for your death. I hate to say it, guys, but we're becoming more and more a society of narcissists. I mean, I can guarantee you that Tommy and Erica have had people walk in here and say, I know they wanted this, but you know what? I want it as cheap as possible and I want the cash out. Now, there's two reasons for that. Either they're going to buy their favorite new car, which does happen, or they're in debt and they are utilizing that estate money to help pay off their debts. That's the society we're in. We don't save as a society. We're in debt as a society. And unfortunately, there's a lot of us that just don't see any value in memorialization ceremony or any of that anymore. And it leads to a rise, especially of cremation. Again, is it every cremation out there? Absolutely not. But that is the trend, as I see it. So theory versus practice. You ask people, do they want to be cremated? About 32% say they want to be cremated and they would prefer to have their cremated body buried or interred in a cemetery. Reality is that about 42% of cremated bodies end up being interred in a final resting place in the cemetery. So it's a little bit higher than people will state it is. Other options we talked about, right? Scattering, dividing among family, or just taking it home and we'll figure it out later. I have a good friend of mine who is an auctioneer in the Jamestown area, and he will tell you story after story of going to prepare for an estate sale. They go into the farmstead, the house, or what have you. They start going through things, they pop and open a closet, and what do you? Aunt Betty, Uncle Joe. And at this point, if it's I can tell you there are funeral homes in our area within 20 miles, 30 miles driving from here that are full of unclaimed cremated bodies. People that have paid for it and have not picked the body up. Again, there's nothing wrong with cremation itself, but what the outcomes are at times, be a little concerned. So the brown section of this kind of represents either people who have chosen a traditional final resting place in the idea of memorialization, or at least they've taken the body home and are open to the idea that that is something that could be possibly done. I want to touch on this real quick. When we hear green burial, I guarantee if I asked everybody to write down what green burial means, I would probably get 15 different answers. Okay? Does it mean cremation or alkaline hydrolysis? Does it mean human composting? Yes, that is a thing. Does it mean a burial capsule? That's a thing. Does it mean natural burial or shroud coffin? Does it mean casket burial of an unembalmed body? Understand that when you hear the term green burial, it can mean a bunch of different things. And I think Angie touched on the best when she said it when they asked, what's your shade of green? Because you know what? Heavy metals are given off during the cremation process. A ton of fossil fuels are burned when you are cremated. Again, I'm not saying that's good or bad. Now, alkaline hydrolysis, this is a new thing that's not in Ohio yet. But they basically stick you in a stainless steel pressure cooker. They add a whole lot of alkaline to you, and it turns your body into liquid. Okay, and then they do the same thing with the bones. They pulverize the bones, and so you end up with something that's.
Have you seen those?
We do alkaline hydrolysis here.
So state of Ohio's approved it now?
Yes.
The state of Ohio has
Yes.
not approved alkaline hydrolysis.
Okay,
We have to take ours over to a state that does approve.
okay, so you can have it done.
We like to use acclimation, and it's breaking down, it's speeding up the decomposition process is basically what.
So basically, you were speeding the process, well, just like when you cremate with fire,
That is different.
you're speeding up a decomposition process through heat and
But you have about
vaporization.
30% more cremated remains left, and you have, I'm a huge proponent here in the state of Ohio. There's a lot of reasons why we don't have it already. 27 states do. And it's just so more eco-friendly than.
And that's what I would say, is it's 100% greener than fire cremation, for sure. 100%. Yeah. But it's had pushback for a lot of different political and non-political reasons. But it is something that I'm assuming will eventually, if it's in 27 states, it's going to get here.
It's gonna get here.
Human
I think we can
composting.
do it.
Human composting is something that's happening out west, where they will actually put you in a capsule with certain microbes and again, speed the process of breakdown. And you pretty much eventually end up as compost. So that is something that is out there. Burial capsule, there's a company, they haven't really taken off, but Capsula Mundi, where they will bury you in a capsule, put you in the ground, plant a tree above you, and then the tree grows down into the capsule and takes the nutrients from your body to grow, is essentially the concept. Again, it's a natural ashes to ashes, dust to dust kind of thing. And then a lot of times when you do natural burial, the body will be placed in the ground without any embalming done. Not always, but that's typically the way. Some cemeteries have adapted to say, well, if somebody wants to be naturally buried in a place where we don't want collapsing graves, they will place the body and then take the top of the vault, the concrete vault, put it over top of them so the body's still in contact with the ground to allow them to, again, more naturally decompose. So that's something that cemeteries are starting to warm up to, because one of the reasons you don't put wooden coffins or wicker caskets in a primary area of the cemetery is as that breaks down and collapses, and anybody that's been in an old cemetery has seen this, you get sinkholes.
The Jewish religion's been doing green burial for thousands of years.
And what they will typically do is they'll put what's called either a ledger, or they will put what's called coping around the grave to basically separate it off from the rest of the area. Traditional American cemetery, they're mowing in those grave spaces. They're trying to keep that mowed and trimmed and everything. So if you have a bunch of sinkholes, you're going to have a hard time maintaining the cemetery. So a lot of the green burial areas in this country are set in a prairie atmosphere like Kateri, where they're keeping it natural. Natural grass, there's no mowing, maintenance, and what have you. And the places like Congressional in Washington that will allow the contact with the earth kind of burial are using a vault over top. Again, not as green because there's concrete in the ground, but that's kind of where they've done to try to adapt to the changing environment that we're in.
And can I say, I think the concept here is this. A good example, my nephew is a fireman. He doesn't want to be put in a mausoleum, and he's been fighting fires all his life, so he really doesn't want to get burned up. So he loves the idea of green burial. So just another great option, I think, that's come up that's really wonderful.
Well, like I said earlier, my wife was whole into cremation until she found out about natural burial, and she's like, I kind of like that idea. So as things come out, you're going to evolve, and that's okay. I mean, but that's where we go down to having conversations with your family as that evolves, right? Having that legal document that says what you want and how you want it done. Those are important things to not only consider but to update. But the bottom line is the desire for people right now is to go back to the earth. And like Tommy just pointed out, there's going to be different ways that meet the needs of different people. And as an industry, that's what we should be doing. Instead of somebody coming and saying, I'd like to do something different, and you saying, nah, get out of here. Our industry's finally saying, like Sam said earlier, let's see if we can figure that out. Okay? So then how does that impact the mindset of the consumer regarding memorialization? When I talk about memorialization, I talk about both ceremony and tangible memorial. We're going to talk about both. So consumer misconceptions about memorialization, both ceremony and product, and how it's my job to help educate you guys, because ultimately it's your decision, right? You can go any way you want to go as long as you put it in a legal document. That's what you want. Okay. And it doesn't violate any state or federal laws. But misconception one, cremation is a final disposition. This is not true. Ohio Revised Code says cremation is final disposition. Ohio's got this wrong. Cremation is preparation of a body. It is not final disposition. Because once you cremate the body does not stay in the crematory as its final resting place. Final disposition is where the body ultimately ends up. So it is preparation. And what I mean by that is that when people consider cremation as final disposition, I'm going to take it home, put it in the closet. I'm going to just put it off. They have shown studies that talk about serious traumatic problems for survivors, including emotional stress. If there's no ceremony, if it's direct cremation, there are actual studies that are showing consequences. Okay. 30% of cremated bodies are being kept at home. And some of it is because families don't fully know what to do. Now, they're a lot better educated this day and age than they were 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, because funeral homes are doing a much better job of showing them their options. Okay? Sometimes they just don't know what to do. So the easy thing is, I'm going to take the urn or the plastic box home, and we will figure this out later. Story, I went to my wife's aunt and uncle's house, and we were talking about this, and talking about cremation, and they said, oh yeah, mom and dad are down in the basement. I said, okay, that's fine. I said, so what happens when the two of you die? What do you mean? Well, what's going to happen to their bodies when you're no longer here to make a decision about it? I mean, if you want to keep them in the basement, that's fine. But when you're gone, which one of the boys is going to know what to do with them? Less than a year later, those two bodies were in the family mausoleum in Pennsylvania. I didn't shame them. I didn't tell them it was wrong. I just asked a question. And it got them to think, you're right, once we're gone, what would happen? What I need to get people to understand is that a retort or a crematory should be equated to an embalming table. It's preparation. And that an urn is a smaller version of a casket. By a show of hands, how many of you would take a casket body home and put it in your garage?
I mean, can I?
Maybe. Erica, that's good. Buddy.
In the interest of science.
But my point is, when we talk about, again, what I call it a cremated body, when we talk about a casket body, the idea of taking it home and putting it in our house is like, are you kidding me? Yet when we reduce this down to a smaller package and put it in something pretty like an urn, all of a sudden it's okay.
Do you think that's sometimes why people want to choose cremation? Is because they want to have that person with them?
100%. But I'm not saying that's healthy.
Oh, I don't disagree.
The desire is there. My mother's desire was to have my father near. We traveled to, and I'm not saying anything, but my mother's a wonderful person, and I'm not judging. But Dad traveled with us a couple times, right? Some people need that, but there's also definitely consequences.
Right. I have somebody in a class right now that I'm teaching that has his brother in the trunk of his car, and he's been there for like 12 years. And he's like, I have a lot of guilt because I don't know what to do with him.
That's called unresolved grief.
Yep.
Sure. And we had, that was
Absolutely.
actually like during my course, and we were talking about that. And
Now,
he
I know my
was
father
bringing that up.
is eventually going to be placed in a memorial. We're working on it. And I think that there is, I would say it's natural and normal to want to hold on. The one thing that final resting places do is force you to deal, and they talked about this earlier, deal with the reality of death. And that's a tough thing to be faced with. And that's one of the reasons why ceremony is so important. It is a communal reality as well as an individual. But if you're never going to do that with this, really think about, at least, I'm not saying don't, but I'm saying at least think about it this way. Make the equation the proper equation. Misconception 2, memorialization serves no purpose and is outdated. Okay? A lot of people feel this way. Why it matters. Memorialization allows closure. And like I said, it's not just for the immediate family, it's a communal thing. It creates that environment that helps people process death. It helps grief pass through its normal stages. A lot of times, if you don't have that ceremony, it kind of cuts off the grieving process. And then it preserves and perpetuates memories and stories for future remembrance. It provides a physical space to process and remember. I had a lady come in January, buy a marker for one of her relatives that hadn't had a marker for years, so she's doing the right thing, right? I want the grave marker. So, okay, that's great. I asked her, as any salesperson with their oats would, what do you plan to do for you? Oh, I'm not going to do anything for me. So, okay. So can I ask you a question? She goes, yeah. I said, do you like genealogy? She said, oh, I love genealogy. I'm actually the genealogist in my family. And I said, okay, so if somebody in your past made the decision that you just said you're going to make about your memorial, how would your genealogy go? She goes, I never thought of it that way. Well, many people have disconnects, right? It's not my job to guilt you into buying a monument. I would love every person in this room to buy a monument. I'll tell you right now. I'm a lot. But I know that's not reality. My job is to educate you, so at least if you're making a decision, it's an educator. She was completely disconnected. And when I put those two together, she's like, oh, because here's the thing, folks, death records at some place somewhere will either be swept away in a flood, we've seen that, they will be burned, digital records will get wiped out. The one place I can tell you that unless something cataclysmic happens, you always have a permanent record of burial is in a cemetery. That's just the fact. And if you are a daughter of American Revolution or daughter of American colonists, and I don't know if this has evolved yet, but it used to be that you had to prove this by actually being able to physically point to a grave. And that allowed you to, now you could do that chain and get the designation. If you couldn't complete the chain by pointing at a grave, you didn't get the designation. This is less and less. I mean, I'm gonna, full disclosure, I don't go to my grandparents' graves as often as I probably should. And my generation and younger is starting less because we've not been taught the importance. That's what we've got to do is educate people. So, Dr. Wolfelt, this is his take on ritual ceremony and the importance. This is the guy that Tommy talked about, that people have to go out to Colorado to deal with the grief because they haven't dealt with them in a way. And he also does this wonderful thing. He actually equips people to be grief counselors. So, fantastic guy. I've never met him. I talked to him once, but I've never met him. And there's a lot of great things. You ever get a chance, he's a really good read on the importance of ceremony and memorialization in our world. Everybody through that? And here's the thing, modern memorials have evolved. It's not this, this place you go and every monument looks the same. It's all gray, it's all this shape, it's all this size. Modern memorialization is very, very personal. This guy was a clockmaker. Guess what's right there? Yeah, a clock. It was designed to look roughly like a grandfather clock with a clock face. This is over at Woodland. You've got, outdoor scenes. The folks' house. Obviously, you know exactly what they like to play,
Yes.
right? So modern, and now we can actually give you photographic images of people, not just paintings or hand etchings. So this isn't the old days of hammer chisel and one shape, one size. We can do so many things, and what these do is these just don't say Joe was born and died. These tell stories. And that's why I am not a tombstone maker. We've got a lot of tombstone makers in Southwest Ohio. I'm a lasting vision of love maker. I take your memories, channel through your grief, and I create a lasting vision of love. That's what these are. Tombstones are name dates and they don't tell you anything. These tell stories. That's what a modern monument can do. And so when you go there with your kids, your grandkids, your great-grandkids, your great-great-grandkids show up, they will actually learn something about who's there. Misconception 3. Good library. Traditional memorial services do not work for us. Besides, we can't get everyone together on short notice. First of all, modern ceremonies, funeral directors are getting it right now, and they're doing a really good job of it. There was a time when they weren't hearing their consumer. They are hearing them loud and clear, especially places like Ralston. And I can promise you, these guys were way ahead of their time. Life celebration ceremonies are gaining popularity. Instead of the traditional in the funeral home funeral, which is still good and still important, there are options that still involve having a funeral director. You can use their community room. And if you notice, this community room has a spot for a body, but very different settings. I'm sure they've had it lined up to where it's rows of chairs, but I'm sure they probably set it up like this here too. So yeah, let that one sink in. Right over there could be. No, I like the bar better, but hey, it's
Could be a
fun.
bar.
Celebrants are now being brought in. The gentleman that was going to talk to us tomorrow afternoon that couldn't is a celebrant used here at Robson. And a celebrant is basically a non-affiliated provider of ceremony. They can have a religious background, they may not, but it's their job just to facilitate the celebration.
Can I make a point on that?
Please do.
All of our funeral directors here, I require them to be celebrants. And the reason is that 60 to 70%, now you gotta grasp that percentage. 60 to 70% of the families we serve now are unchurched.
And yet 60, 70% of people in this country, if you ask them, claim themselves to be spiritual.
They are spiritual.
So there's those two different things, right? The church and the spiritual. And what the celebrant does is it allows folks that have that spiritual underpinning and otherwise to have an outlet that doesn't require them to formally pick a clergy member from a denomination. Would that be a fair description?
Yeah, he does a ceremony that has a temperature of 0 to 10 in religious content, and you have to, he spends about an hour to 2 hours with every family figuring out what made the person tick. He believes that every life needs to be celebrated, and he is absolutely fabulous.
He can sound like your pastor, or he can sound like not a pastor at all. And it's his job to know where you want to be. Informal settings over churches and funeral homes. And sometimes it's informal settings within the funeral homes. Instead of the traditional viewing in funeral space, it's maybe more open format, right? Kind of an open house. My wife and I have talked about this. We don't want the lineup. We'd like to go into a big room, and if, I'm dead, and people walk in, like John LaRock, who knows me from Xenia, and my son has no flipping idea who John LaRock is, John doesn't have to stand in line and say, oh, I was in Rotary with, because my son could care less, right? It gives John an opportunity to walk into the people that he knows, pay his condolences. God forbid it was my wife that died. He's going to come see me. So there's these kind of options. If you want a traditional inline viewing visitation, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. What I'm saying is funeral homes understand that that's not everybody, and they're finally coming around to the fact that we're going to cater to you. and I think you heard that from Sam and the panel loud and clear. Instead of trying to force feed you what their service is, they're now going to ask, like you just said about Brian, what do you want? That's a big change in this industry because it wasn't always that way. You walk in a funeral home and it was this way, right? Focus on a life well lived instead of death and loss. I remember as a kid going to funerals and it was all about the death and the grief, and it just felt like somebody was just closing in on me, okay? It was just so somber. And that may be something that works for certain people. But nowadays, it seems that remembering a life well lived is more the focus. Yes, there's still sadness, there's still sorrow, there's still that somber undertone. But when you can tell stories about, a month after Dad died, we were sitting around at Dodd's, we have an annual Thanksgiving, and I just stood up and I said, I'd like to hear Eric's stories. And for 30 minutes, people that knew him sat there and told anything from he changed my life stories to he was face down with 2 broken bases in a forklift coming off a truck stories. I mean, you had the gambit. And it was so cathartic for all of us. And those are the kind of things that now your good funeral homes understand and are willing to work with you on. And unique funerals. And when I say unique, I'm serious. I'm talking setting up a lady as if she's in the tropics at the funeral home because that's what she wants. Is that my cup of tea? No. But it's open. Or how about the Steelers fan that wants to be in his recliner watching the Steelers game? Now, number one, I'm a Browns fan, so I have a problem with this altogether. But is this everybody's cup of tea? No. But it doesn't have to be. It's what that family wanted, right? Or this dude was buried riding his motorcycle. I mean, they dug a grave and buried that whole hermetically sealed thing into the ground. Is it my cup of tea? Absolutely not. But you know what? It doesn't have to be. That's what makes this personal. And that's why that works for those families. And that's what the modern funeral home is going to do for you, is be open to these ideas. Funeral homes have community rooms we've talked about, but understand the funeral industry still has a vital role to play. Because at your weakest, most traumatized, fog of grief moment, you've got to have somebody that you can hand that person you lost to, and it says to you, no matter what your wishes are, it's going to be okay, and we're going to take care of it. And if you don't have a funeral director, who's going to do that for you? Let that sink in. If you don't have a funeral director, who's going to do that for you? There's a lot of media that's been out there about how funeral directors are this, funeral directors are that. They just try to take your money, Good. That's just not true. It is a passion, and this is not a cheap thing to do. It takes a lot of manpower. It takes a lot of work. The processes they have to go through to involve a body, that stuff's not cheap. Caskets don't build themselves. So the idea of some outside reporters saying that all funeral homes are out to screw you is just gobbledygook as far as I'm concerned. They are doing a service that most people, including myself, could not handle. And I think they deserve every penny. I'm working on a discount for my pre-arrangement. Here's the other part of modern ceremony that look at this. You know what this kid's doing? Helping mix the cremated body in with concrete to then be created into a reef ball that is set out into the ocean, and it will help propagate new coral reefs. And they will position it with a GPS coordinate so that anybody that cares knows right where that reef ball is. Kid you not, you can actually be packed into fireworks and blown. You want to talk about scattering? This is scattering, okay? So you can fire it out, blown out. I mean, honest to goodness, that you can do that. They have, and you'll see some of these products in their room, Passages International out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. They make things where you can put the body in a turtle or a sand dollar, you put it out in the ocean, and it just slowly dissolves, sinks, done. Obviously, traditional scattering, that is one of those wicker caskets for natural burial right there. And then also, I mean, hey, if you have a cremated body, the one thing it does afford you is you can easily grab that thing and have a service anywhere you want. Right there on the beach if you wanted to. Okay? You have options that are not traditional that can meet your needs if that's what you want. And if you want a straight up traditional, music thing, it's that fantastic. This is not a message for you guys because you've already got your spot. I want you to know that if you're not that person, these folks can still help you because they can set this stuff up. Last misconception, permanent memorials do not work for cremation or green burial. Every one of these is a style of permanent memorial for a body. Here's your capsula mundi. You put the body in here, you plant the tree above it, the tree becomes the permanent memorial. Similar, and you'll see one of these, I think, actually in their room. You take the cremated body, put it in here, there's a small tree that they give you, you bury it, and the tree grows out of that. If you go to Kateri at Calvary, the only thing you're allowed to have is a boulder, and they will engrave the boulder and place it there. You can have a bigger boulder. You can have multiple boulders. You can have this. This is actually typically used as a cenotaph. Does anybody besides professionals know what a cenotaph is? Anybody? So a cenotaph is a memorial that represents a person who is not there. Think Washington Monument, Lincoln Monument. George Washington's in Mount Vernon. He's not in Washington, D.C. But they've erected a monument as a cenotaph to honor him. So if you're scattered out at sea, but you still want a record of your existence, which you should have for your future, you can take one of these plaques and you can have it mounted on the family memorial in the family cemetery. And now they know that Uncle Willie was scattered at sea and there's a record of his existence. Memorials do not have to be massive. If you want a massive memorial, well, we're happy to help you with that. But memorials don't have, it's not about money. It's about memorialization. Every one of these are memorials for a cremated body. Okay? These sit on an individual grave. The niches are right there. Same with this. This bench is on two graves, but the cremated bodies go right in there. Obviously, if you are one that decides to have the body at home, we have stands that we can make for that urn. We even have urns, and this is what Dad's in. He's got an urn that's etched on two sides, and that's his temporary place until we get the memorial done. This is a community columbarium at a cemetery. If you want to be urned with mom and dad, you can do that too. This walk-in is not a mausoleum. This is a walk-in columbarium. Is there a hand somewhere? Yes.
So you were talking about cenotaphs,
Yes.
and so what I'm thinking is, let's say you wanted to put a cenotaph somewhere,
Mhm.
but maybe there's nobody in the family that is already buried at the cemetery in your town. Like, would a cemetery give you place without remains?
You are not required to bury it at a plot that you purchase. Okay? So other than, no, I wouldn't even say, Jewish cemeteries, especially the Orthodox person's name unless they're dead in there.
Uh-huh.
But for most other cemeteries, you buy the plot, any monument can be a cenotaph. Understand it, it's not about size, it's about whether the body's located there or not located there. So yes, you can get a plot, you can have a memorial
Could you have like a niche?
created.
That would be significant. Like, I'm just thinking this is not for me, but just in general, if somebody didn't want to spend the money for a whole plot, but they just wanted,
Okay, this isn't a money thing, but in honor of my father, Calvary Cemetery, in their new Garden of Peace columbarium, put a leaf, there's a big bronze tree leaf thing on the wall, and they placed my father's name there as a cenotaph to honor him. That helps answer the question.
I was gonna say, one of the churches we work with most frequently in Oakwood, they have what they refer to as the eternal party room underneath the actual church. And they have niches for several hundred members of the parishioners that actually attended there. So it's always interesting when we go down there because it's like, oh, I remember blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. Now Dad's going down here. So it just, it feels right. So it's all kinds of places. It doesn't have to, I guess the point being, it doesn't necessarily have to be a cemetery either, too, in that circumstance.
My grandparents are at Maple Hill Cemetery in Tip City, but until my grandfather died, my grandmother was in one of these boulders in my mom's backyard. Again, temporarily, and then was placed. Now, I'm glad that my parents lived to do that, so I didn't have to. And I'm not saying I recommend it, but the reality is people are going to do what they're going to do, and we can either just turn our nose to them or we can accommodate them. And so that is something that is movable, that can be put in your garden. I waited for Angie to leave to show you that because I didn't want to be. So let's just say that we all think that memorialization is a bunch of hooey, right? We don't need memorialization anymore. What would a world without memorialization look like?
That's clever, isn't it?
What would a world without memorialization look like? When we think of other people who are important people, all of a sudden memorialization is important. When we start talking about ourselves, we devalue the memorialization part. I mean, if anybody walked up to you and said, should Abraham Lincoln have a monument in Washington? How many people are like, no, that's a waste of time? Not many. But when we bring it to ourselves and we personalize it, now all of a sudden we don't have the same value. And my argument is, again, I'm not asking you to build a Lincoln monument. I'll help you if you want to. But what I'm saying is, have something that memorializes yourself. Something that's a permanent record so that when that genealogist comes 100 years from now, they can say, oh, that's where they are. Hey, that's my great aunt so-and-so. Sir William Gladstone said this. And I think it's just as relevant today as it ever has been. Takeaways, it's going to increase. It's the new normal. Families are ill-equipped to deal with loss and need gentle guidance through education, like before I die festivals, right? Remembering someone through ceremony and tangible memorial helps. Modern options allow ceremony. They meet the desires of the modern consumer. And it is up to death care professionals to inform and educate, because a lot of decisions are still being made out of ignorance. And with that, this should never be an option. Questions, answers? Yes, Kristen.
So, I'm one of those people that has ashes sitting on a shelf.
Cremated body.
Yes, sorry, thank you. I know, I should know by now too. I've heard that.
I
I've
know
been
her
corrected
personally,
out-
folks. It's okay.
I've been corrected many times by Neil. One of these days it'll stick. So I have my husband's cremated body on the shelf in my office. The reason I didn't memorialize him and put him in the ground or inter him or whatever is because we aren't from here. We didn't, we'd only lived here for a certain period of time. Our family's not from here. And this may be a question for Rousong as well. What are you seeing people do in those circumstances? How are people memorializing when there's no, I know there's all kinds of options, but what is the trend? Do you know?
The first thing you got to answer for yourself is where ultimately do you want that person to be? Do you want them close to where they're from? Or do you want them close to where you are? Because when you're talking about somebody that's moved, whether it's your situation or somebody's, now been living in Florida for 15 years, you've got to make that choice. I would suggest that you make that choice rather than not, because when you're not around, then that choice can be made by somebody else.
Sure.
And so is there a right or wrong, Christy? There's not. You've got to ultimately say, do I want the ability to go visit this person close by? Or do I want to afford that ability in a hometown where people know them? My wife is going to be buried with me at Maple Hill Cemetery in Tip City. She's from Stockport, Ohio. Anybody know where Stockport is? I didn't think so. So, now the thing that can help you with that, physical location, one place, cenotaph again.
Yeah.
And now there's record of existence in both places. And you can even put buried in
Yeah.
such and such cemetery and such and such.
And honestly, that's been my, my issue is because I'm transient, right? I'm born in New Orleans, lived in Baltimore, lived in Pennsylvania, now I'm in Ohio. Who knows, right? Who knows? Now, granted, my husband will probably die, and whatever in Xenia, but
As long as he's working the cemetery.
right, as long as he's still digging graves there, yeah. Anyway, I don't mean to be insensitive. I apologize. That's always that fear, right? And so I was just curious, so what the trend,
And there's never a right or a wrong. And I think that's the problem, is people are more afraid of making the wrong decision instead of just making. Sometimes
Exactly.
it's not that you make the best decision, it's
Right.
that you make
Made the decision, right?
So my dad's alive,
Mhm.
and he is a veteran. And we came out to your place to get a veteran stone, and we found out that you can't do that till after they pass away.
That's correct. If you're a veteran and you want a memorial from the government, it has to be posthumous. You can get a memorial and put anything you want on it, but to get the veterans government, and a lot of people don't realize this, but that bronze marker is not the only option. There's actually 4 or 5 different options as a veterans memorial, but it has to be posthumously if you're wanting to get it from the federal government.
The other thing that I've heard is sometimes it takes a long time to get the stone you need in order to complete the monuments.
COVID had a lot to do with that. Overseas granite is obviously going to have its issues of travel. But if you have an issue with that, then you want to buy domestic granite from a place like Rock of Ages, where you don't have to worry about supply chain disruptions as much. But COVID had a lot to do with what happened there. And it took about 2 years for that to work itself out.
In my case, I feel a little bit different. We've been married 50 years. And I know my wife, she does not have any feeling like that at all. She is not a nostalgic person. She will it drives me crazy because I have to use the term, I'm a collector. A collector now, I'm a collector. I keep everything. She has given so much, that's what she'll do. She gives stuff to Goodwill. If something gets a little too tight, it goes to Goodwill. I admire her for that, for what she does. In my case, I'm completely different. I'm a historian. I admire history things. I'm impressed with history. And I have to tell you a little story about our house. We've been married that long. We've had animals, companion animals, for 25 years. We've had over 20 animals. Every one of those animals have been cremated. A couple here, as a matter of fact. They are in urns on top of our living room.
Lined up.
With a plaque on them that says what date they died, loving memory. That's the difference in it. So in my case, I'm a retired 40-year engineer. I think I kept every paper or thing that I had, and I have it all. And this is no lie, I've got about 25 free-ring binders through, and that's not hoarding, they're really neat and everything.
Every engineer.
But that is, I've already made arrangements, and this has made me think I've got to speed it up. I'm 90 years old, and I'm still pretty active.
But here's what I'm going to tell you,
I've
based.
got all of these binders, and I've made arrangements to put it in right state.
But what I will tell you is, based on what you said about you and your wife, it's my job to educate. ultimately, you're all gonna do what you wanna do. And some of you may walk out of here and say, there is no way I'm doing a formal service to get the money, I'm doing this. All I ask is that we educate people. Educated people at least make educated decisions. My issue is a lot of people are making uneducated decisions because they're uneducated. We can't make people buy monuments and do traditional funerals. But I'll be darned if I'm not going to at least explain that to people, so at least they're thinking and making an educated decision.
You notice she's not here this afternoon.
But you know what? You can tell her that now you'll be making an educated decision. Anything else?
Regarding cremation and having a service at a church, do you have to have the remains there at the church when you have the visitation, if you have the visitation at the church?
I think Tommy John touched on this. If
And
the
I
body's
wasn't here
present,
earlier.
it's usually a funeral service. If the body's not present, it can be considered a memorial service. That's ultimately up to you. Okay? Whether you have the body present or not is a personal preference. Sam?
I will say with the caveat of the belief system of the church.
Yep.
For instance, if it's the Catholic Church, they're gonna be there, whether it's ashes or somebody's body, right? Other churches, really, it's up to the person. It is an individual choice, but it does go back to church doctrine. So just, I guess, for the most part, it depends.
And a caveat to his caveat, if you look out this door here, we have what's called an urn art. So it allows participation from family members. It's got an urn in it. So that's a really great way to celebrate a life is by, grandkids participating, friends participating. And it creates, I think, a lot of work to it.
Yeah, my personal take is you should have the body there because, again, it is reality, it is finality, and ultimately, we as humans need that to say, yeah, if you've got a body in front of you, it is very hard to say, they kind of didn't really. It is reality in your face, and that's what is important in a lot of ways about ceremony. There's a million other things that are more important, but it lets you realize, hey, you're face to face with it. There's no denying when you're face to face with it. And I think that's an important component of ceremony, is that you're facing that loss head on instead of trying to pretend it's not there.
Well, I'm concerned because he's gonna give his body to right state. And you just said it could be 2 to 3 years before you get the,
So that's a special circumstance, right?
yeah.
Those
so
are special
could you put
circumstances.
a thing up there on the altar or in the gathering space?
Ultimately, it is between you, the funeral home that's helping you with the ceremony, and the church you're going to.
Okay.
Frequently, I would say like items of meaning could be a good stand-in. Special fishing pole, because you guys go fishing all the time, or if you're a gardener, your favorite gardening tools, like any stuff like that is also a good, stand-in the meantime. Just something to kind of connect it all back, right? Like maybe this person had imbued their essence into these special things, or a picture or something like that. Maybe it's not the same as having someone there, but it does a pretty good job of at least kind of bridging that gap a little bit.
I like that.
I think from my perspective, there needs to be a focal point. There needs to be a reason why we're here, and a picture, an urn, gives us that focal and that reality that the deaths occurred. Have we had what we call false setups before, where couldn't get a cremation permit and the urn is empty? Well, only the family and us know that.
Yeah.
You don't. So it's but it still has the same effect in that kind of stuff.
Now, ultimately, it is a very individualized or very family-oriented choice. All we ask is that you're making it an educated choice, and that's why we're here. Any other questions? Well, hey, thanks for sticking with us through this whole thing. We appreciate it. Like I said, anybody that's not signed up for tomorrow that wants to come, we'd love to have you. If you are signed up for a Woodland event, that begins at 6 o'clock. It is sold out. For those of you that aren't signed up, unfortunately, we're sold out. So for those of you that are coming tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you then. Those that you are not, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time to do this and to be open to the importance of what we are talking.
And if you do come back tomorrow from 4 to 6, we're doing a doors open funeral home tour so we can talk about all the different stuff. We'll show you our care center. We can talk about scattering tubes and the eternal reef and all that kind of stuff. So we'd love to have you out for that, and we can take a little bit more time on a smaller group basis and kind of walk you through everything too. So thanks, Neil. And yeah, if any of you are coming to Woodland, we're looking forward to it. It's going to be a fun night.
And a quick hand again for Outsun for doing everything they did today.
And as always, if anybody has questions, I'll be over here.
Like you said, you got any questions, Sam's over there.
Especially the hard ones.